actually agree. Talk is cheap. Life's got to be actions. Making a living from dibur and speech is a lot harder than making a living from actions. You know why? Because it's a lot easier to get lazy. When a person gets lazy, he stops to live. I teach Torah. That's what I do. I teach. I'm very lucky. I'm a very lucky man. But one of the things that happens when you teach is that you're always learning. It's just the nature of the game. When I first got married, I was learning a lot by myself. Now I have much less time to learn by myself. I also have much less physical strength to learn by myself. But I learn from my teaching, I learn from my teaching. So I had a very interesting experience happen to me recently. It happens to me all the time. I have a website with over 14,000 classes. That's not a joke. You know how many mistakes there are on those classes? You have any idea how many times I made mistakes? Hundreds for sure, probably thousands.
You get hate mail?
Huh? I don't get hate mail, I get corrections. I get corrections. People say, Rabbi, you made a mistake and here's the correction. And the most interesting kind of correction is when I'm corrected about something that I'm so sure about, and then it turns out Pasha to be wrong. So on the one hand, I feel terrible. I found out over this weekend that something that I've been teaching for 30 years was wrong. And I feel so stupid. I mean, the unfortunate truth is that most people are not even going to know. Yeah, Rabbi Paltiel said it. It's true. That's how the game is played. People. Now I'm a source of stories. How am I a source of stories? Because every story I told, I heard. I didn't see it. So what if I made a mistake? Then the mistake becomes lore. It becomes historical fact. That's how it is. It's unfortunate. It's just true. So I was giving a shiur about Lag BaOmer recently. I mentioned it in a class. Now, Lag BaOmer is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. You know that? Lag BaOmer is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. If Lag BaOmer is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, Lag BaOmer goes back a long time. There's no Lag BaOmer in the Gemara. There's no Lag BaOmer in the Gemara. I guarantee you that. Okay? But there is a halacha that goes back probably 1,000 years, maybe more. It goes back to the times of the Yishonim. And it must have been a Mesorah Bal Peh. It must have been an oral tradition. That the days of Sfira are days of Avelos. You know this. That the 7 weeks of Sfira, so Eimer, are days of Avelos. You're not supposed to listen to music. You don't make weddings. The Rebbe recently revealed that during Sfira, on Shabbos, you can make a Shechayana. We used to think that you don't make a Shechayana during this. In other words, if you have a new fruit, and this is the season for new fruit after Pesach, you don't eat. We used to not make Shechayana Pesach to Shavuos, period. The Rebbe revealed to Harav Mordechai Eliyahu in the winter of Nun Beis that during the 3 weeks, during the Sfira on Shabbos make Shechayana. During the 3 weeks not, but Sfira during the week you don't make Shechayana. Shabbos make Shechayana on a new fruit and so on, maybe on a new beged even. I don't know. What's the reason for the Avelos? The reason for Avelos is because Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim passed away. Correct? Everybody knows this. We also know, it's a Gemara Masechta Yevamos, but the Gemara Masechta Yevamos does not give a timeline. The Gemara in Masechta Yevamos says that Kula Mesub Eisei Pedika, but Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim died in a very short, he had 24,000 Talmidim, and they died in 6 weeks. That's pretty depressing. Pretty depressing. It's gefährlich. His whole yeshiva, they got a disease, they got a contagious disease, and they died. Boom, 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 boom. What did Rabbi Akiva do? He went to the south of Eretz Yisrael, he went to Yehuda, built a new yeshiva with 5 Talmidim. Instead of 24,000, he had 5. And those 5 Talmidim are the source of the entire Torah Bal Peh. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and Rabbi Meir. Right? That's the story. Somehow we know orally, and this is brought in halacha, that it happened between Pesach and Shavuos. However, it's also known that they died not in 7 weeks, they died in 32 days. 32 days is how many weeks? It's 4.5 weeks. 4.5 weeks plus a day. Yeah? You can't divide a day even. 31 and a half days would be exactly half. 32 days they died. The Shaila is only one of the 32 days. There's two opinions of Shulchan Aruch. There's two opinions. One opinion, they died from the first day of Sfira until Lamed Beis Ba'omer. So Lamed Gimel Ba'omer, they stopped dying. Finished. The other opinion is that they started dying from the second day of the month of Iyar, which means that they stopped dying Shloshis Me'akbala, but the 3 days before Shavuos. And the halacha actually says, and there are Jews who do this, by the way, we keep Sfira the whole 7 weeks. No music, no wedding, the whole 7 weeks. There are Yidden who start Sfira only in Iyar, not Pesach. The halacha is you could keep any 32 days you wish. The 32 days of Velas, the death of Rabbi Akiva is your choice. You can keep it from the second day Pesach to Lab Ba'omer, and Lag Ba'omer you can start making weddings and simchas and so on. Or you can start from the beginning of Iyar and go to Shloshis Me'akbala. What you're not allowed to do is burn the candle at both ends. Can't say, since we don't know, I'm going to be makel on this side. In other words, till Iyar, I have simcha because maybe they didn't die. From Lag Ba'omer, we have simcha, maybe they didn't die. You can't do that. You choose, as Ada did, you choose one of the 32 or the other 32. L'poil, we do both. But this is the first idea of Lag Ba'omer that we know. Is that Lag Ba'omer is a Yom Tov, because Paschal, Talmidei, Rabbi Akiva, Midlamas, Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim stopped dying. Now, if you go in the Shita that they died from the second day Pesach till Lamed Beis Ba'omer, that makes sense. They stopped dying. But if you go in the Shita that you start from the second day of Iyar till Shloshis Me'akbala, they took a day off. If there's 24,000 Talmidim and there's 32 days of the die, that's an average 667 Talmidim per day. It's a lot of dying. They took a day off, that's all. So that's a Yom Tov. The next day items are gestorben. Right? If you go in the second Shita. But this is the first reason for Lag Ba'omer is that the Talmidim B'kiva Paschal Milamas. Whether you go in the Shita that it was the end of the death of the Talmid Rabbi Akiva, or is it interruption of the Rabbi Akiva? Both of them are very difficult. And I have a klutz kasha. If a person has a bunch of yeshiva students, and all of his students die, all of them die, so they stop dying because there's nobody left to die. Exactly, what's the holiday? Kula meisa beisa shah, beisa peidik, whatever the Lashon of the Gemara is. They all died at the same time. So what's the Yom Tov? There's nobody left to die. Unless you say that some didn't. I have no sources whatsoever, but my feeling is that the 5 Talmidim that he collected later, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua and Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and Rabbi Meir, they were in the yeshiva too. They survived, and he took them to another place and he continued the yeshiva with them. That's the only way to explain it. So then you have a reason,
Even with that explanation, it doesn't sound like a Yom Tov.
Right.
Maybe it's like,
5 out of 24,000. What's the celebration? L'poil, this is the Metzias Advarim. Lag Ba'omer is a Yom Tov because Rabbi Akiva's been stopped dying. Now, just to throw in one more detail, there are people who make chasnas Lag Ba'omer. Sfiras time you don't make chasnas. And again, remember there's 2 shitas. In Ashkenazi circles, I don't know about Misnag literature, but in the modern Orthodox circles, they make weddings after Pesach. They only start Sfira from Iyar. Like I said, the halacha gives you a choice. Until the Shir, till this time. But they make weddings like when is a Yom Tov? It's a simcha. In Chabad, once upon a time, the tradition was that even on Lag Ba'omer you didn't make a wedding, and even on Lag Ba'omer you didn't take a haircut. When I was growing up, it was a special day, it's for the Lag Ba'omer parades, you know what I'm saying? But to make a wedding Lag Ba'omer we didn't do, to make haircuts Lag Ba'omer we didn't do. Making a wedding is very tricky, you know why? Because which night are you going to make it? If you make it the night before, you start before Lag Ba'omer, so how could you have music? If you make it the night after, it continues into the night of Lamadal Ba'omer. How could you have music? It gets tricky. Unless you make an early afternoon wedding, that the wedding is over before the sun sets. The last couple of years before Nun Beis, first of all, they never took a haircut. I think they never took a haircut Lag Ba'omer, which is a big chiddush, but never took a haircut Lag Ba'omer. And the Rebbe said we should make weddings. I had a cousin who got married Lag Ba'omer based on that Eirah from the Rebbe. So in other words, they never changed it. Lag Ba'omer is enough of a simcha that not only you make a parade, but you make a wedding, you take a haircut. It's b'chlal not. There's no avails at all. Not true.
Even haircuts, you don't really do.
Huh?
You don't really do haircuts.
So I'm saying the Rebbe himself took a haircut like Ba'imir. So you can take a haircut like Ba'imir. If the Rebbe took a haircut like Ba'imir, you can take a haircut like Ba'imir. Because I'm lost now, the Rebbe is like a Yid. I can't learn it from a Yid. Now, then comes Rab Shimon. Like Ba'imir is connected to the Estalkos of Shimon Yochai. So here's my mistake that I made. I said in a class, I don't know if you guys know this, and you don't have to know this, and you don't have to research it. You don't have to get involved in every skeptical debate in the Jewish world. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai lived almost 2,000 years ago. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. He lived after the Churban of the second Beis Hamikdash. He was the first generation after the Churban. Rabbi Akiva, the Churban was presided over by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's students were Rabbi Akiva's teachers. But Rabbi Akiva lived 120 years. Rabbi Akiva lived a very long time. And for the first 40 years of his life, he couldn't read Aleph Beis. It is possible that Rabbi Akiva was born before Churban Bayis Sheni. It's actually, I think it's a fact. Because he was killed. Rabbi Akiva lived 120 years. He was killed during the revolt of Bar Kochba, which meant that he was 50 when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. But I'm not sure about that detail. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was Rabbi Akiva's Talmud. So you're talking 1,800 years ago. It was a very long time ago. And everybody knows that Lag BaOmer is the Yartat of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. They go to Miron. You make a big Yom Tov, you dance, you pour olive oil. It's a whole simcha. You make a fire. Shimon bar Yochai is the Yartat. He lula the Rashbi, yeah? Here's the problem. 1,800 years ago, nobody made parties on Lag BaOmer. 1,700 years ago, when did it start? When did Lag BaOmer begin? That's why you have people who don't hold of Kabbalah, and I'm not going into it now, but there are people who don't hold of Kabbalah. The people who don't hold Kabbalah make a mockery. The whole Lag BaOmer is a joke. Now you must understand, the first reason for Lag BaOmer is not found in Kabbalah. The first reason for Lag BaOmer is found in Rishonim. It's found in Halacha. The first reason for Lag BaOmer is Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim stopped dying. That you can't argue about. That's found in Halacha. Shulchan Aruch. And it goes back to the Rishonim. In other words, it doesn't start after that either. But the second reason for Lag BaOmer, that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai passes away, and this is the reason for a Yom Tov, it's hard to know when it starts. So I said what I thought to be true, that the beginning of the celebration of Lag BaOmer is the Arizal. I don't know if you understand this. The Arizal is a very unusual person in the history of the world, history of the Jewish people. He is one of the most unusual personalities. You know why? Number one, he was extremely controversial. Arizal was very controversial. Like the Rambam was controversial, like the Baal Shem Tov was controversial, like the Alter Rebbe was controversial, like the Rebbe is controversial. The Arizal was extremely controversial. You know why? Because he made new stuff. Any rabbi who comes along and makes new stuff is immediately suspect. The Arizal was a force, and he passed away at 36 years old. It's not normal. He passed away yeah. Imagine, and he was a force. The greatness of the Arizal is it's beyond fathoming. When you compare him to other Gedolei Yisrael, he's on a whole other level. And he had no hislagdus. The Arizal was so great that he had no opposition. I mean, the Rambam, 100 years after he lived, they were burning his Sfarim. Kipshutei. The Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe, I need to tell you, the Ari was so great that he, in spite of how controversial he was, the Arizal got away with it. I mean, you could explain it. The Arizal had a very small chabura. Arizal was not a Rebbe for the masses. He was a Rebbe for tzaddikim gemurim, for 10 guys, whatever his small chevra that he had. But Arizal was incredibly great. Do you understand this? You've been to Israel, right? You've been to Israel? How many graves of Tanoim and Amiroim do we have? Hundreds. Those graves have not been there for 2,000 years. Those graves have been there for 500 years. That Arizal used to walk around Eretz Yisrael and say, here's Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. Here's Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. Here's Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Loi. Here's Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha. Here is the 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. He walked around the Eretz Yisrael and identified spots. So-and-so is buried here, so-and-so is buried here, so-and-so is buried here. They put up matzeves. Nobody questions Arizal. It's not normal. Amongst Jews,
Isn't that
the Roiv, I would say Rubim Kakula, of the graves of the Chazal, of the Tanoim and Amirayim, Iket Tanoim, right? Whose graves we now have, that people visit all the time, and they say Kapet Lachtilim, have not been known throughout the diaspora. Arizal disclosed them. But his Ruach HaKodesh, his standing, the people were so sure that he doesn't make up stuff. He could have told you that there's 2 moons revolving around the earth, and you'd believe him. You only see one, you have bad eyes. Mamish. And most of the Kvarim, so I always believed that the Arizal was the one who was Machadish Lag Baimer. In other words, we knew about Lag Baimer from a halacha point of view, because it's brought in the Rishonim. It says in the Rishonim, I think it says in It says in the Rishonim that a Lag Baimer, the Bekivas Talmidim start passing away, so b'meila we have a Yom Tov. Okay? But that Lag Baimer is the yard site of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, and therefore it's a Yom Tov? Who introduced that? Who revealed this? I always thought it was Arizal. So I said it in the class. So a guy walks into my class the next day, bright guy. He learned by me 36 years ago. 30, but I was a bacha still. But at the time I did realize how smart he is. He's an intellectual, actually. You know, to be an intellectual in America, and Alachas Kama Vakama, to be intellectual in Lubavitch, is a double Rachmanis, because I saw once Adina Evan Yisrael said in a speech, you hate intellectuals. He was speaking to an American audience, you hate it. See an intellectual, you're such a smart guy, a braino. And he brought me a sefer from a great uncle of his, a famous man, who describes the Bartenura, Rabbi Vadia Bartenura, coming to Miran on Lag Baimer and seeing a celebration 100 years before Arizal was born. So I was wrong. How many times did I say in a class that the one who was regarded as Lag Baimer is the Yard of the Rashbi is the Arizal? Probably 50. And then one guy comes and says, take all those 50 classes off the internet, take them down, they're all wrong. I can't, it's not possible.
You can't,
a disclaimer. I don't even know which classes I said it in. I don't even know where he heard it, but he brought me a sefer, he showed it to me. So now I have a new shaila. If before Rashbi, before the Arizal, they had Lag Baimer, so who revealed it? It has to, they didn't have it in Zman HaGoyim. It would have been brought in Sfarim. Now one of the Rishonim mentions it. Nobody mentions it. The Rambam doesn't mention it. Even the Rishonim that Kabbalah, the Raive, the Ramban, who were Mekubalim. Nobody mentioned it. So who revealed it? I don't know. Back to square one. Some Yid came along at some point and he said that this day is not just a day when Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying. It's the day that one of them died, but this death is a Yom Tov. One of the great ironies of Lag Baimer. You celebrate the cessation of death and death on the same day. You have a Yom Tov for 2 reasons. A, plenty stopped to pass away. B, plenty passed away. In fact, Yom Tov. So this is it just happened to me in the last couple of weeks. I like to be Ameid al Emes. But this happened to me about so many things. I tell stories that I'm so convinced are true, and sometimes a rabbi, the story is, it's a grandmother's story, and he brings me a raya. I told the story, so the whole world is telling the story of my name, and it's not true. Eat your heart out. It happens to me, and I feel terrible about it. So I don't know how long ago this Yom Tov is. It's not been there the whole time. I mean, the Jews not living in Israel. Like Ba'ema is Achei Temimim. There were hundreds of years there was no Yid in Eretz Yisrael. The reason the Talmud Yerushalmi was sealed, the Jerusalem Talmud was closed, is because they kicked Yidden out of Eretz Yisrael. The early Christians, they're called Aryan Christians, I don't even know what that means. They kicked the Jews out of Israel. For a few hundred years there was no Yidden. Period. And because there was no Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, they couldn't give smicha, because smicha has to be in Eretz Yisrael. And when the Yidden came back, they were not able to renew the smicha. It's a whole story unto itself. But Miran, there has not been access to Miran uninterrupted for the last 2,000 years. It's just not a fact. So at some point later on, this Yom Tov became, or maybe it came back, I don't know. I have no way of knowing. But this is a fact, that what I said, that the Arizal was the one who revealed that like Ba'em is the Yom Tov to the Rashbi, is just not true. Go ahead, talk to me.
So didn't Rashbi himself say that this should be the Simcha?
Yeah, but it doesn't say a day. I'm about to get to that. Yeah? Where is the story of Rab Shimon's passing? The story of Rab Shimon's passing is in a book which is called Zohar. Zohar, yeah. Another controversy, right? Who wrote the Zohar and when was it written? By us, it's accepted by Pashta, so the Zohar was written by the Tanoim. It's from the Manashas. There are people who insist that the Zohar was written by the person. Do me a favor, Tzebach. Give me back your copy, please. And when I asked you if you're in my class, I didn't mean officially. I meant actually. By us, it's ongenum b'pashtos that the Zohar was written by Rab Shimon bar Yochai, by Rab Abba. The author of the Zohar is Rab Abba. But the Zohar was discovered much later. Much later. And by the way, there's a machlekes about that too. Some people say we had the Zohar for the Zman HaGoinim already. Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, in his Sefer Shem and Amurim, says that the Zohar was around for the Zman HaGoinim. The Rabbeinu B'chaya has Medrash Rab Shimon. Medrash Rab Shimon is Zohar. Every Medrash Shimon is Zohar, but he has it in Hebrew, not in Aramaic. And L'choira, the Rabbeinu B'chaya was before the rediscovery of the Zohar. It's interesting. But most people accept that it was copied by a Yid named Rabbi Yehuda de Leon who lived in Spain, and the Apakursim liked to say that he wrote it himself, and he attributed it to the Rashbi so that it should be more acceptable. But also it's Oganum that's a Sheker V'chozov. No, it goes back there. But we didn't have it for 700 years.
They say because it quotes people that were never alive.
They were alive either before or after.
So
Okay.
no, they're saying they quoted like people who Rashbi would not have been alive in times of Rashbi.
I know.
That's
So-
why they say it's fake.
No, that's not why they say it's fake. See, there's two questions. Historians don't care about fake and real. It's a historical fact. When was this book written? Who wrote it? Now, by Otzat Davar HaPoshet, in the Pshim bar Yochai's Heichel, Moshe Rabbeinu was a regular visitor. Moshe has a whole section there called Ra'im Mehemne. He would come to the yeshiva and he would say Divrei Torah. They wrote it down. He has his own neighborhood. The problem is that the people who lived after Rab Shimon who showed up, Rab Chia, who also came to the yeshiva and taught. But it's not a question of, it's a question of when it was written. True and false, they don't believe in Torah. They don't believe in Ruach HaKodesh, they don't believe in Nevuah, they don't believe in the Eibush, they don't believe in Ganesh. But simply on a historic level, who wrote the book? But uns is angenommen, but Pashtas was written by Talmidei Rab Shimon bar Yochai. In the Zohar, in Pashas Ha'azinu, there's something called the Idra Zuta, where Rab Shimon, where the whole story goes on for many, many pages. Most of it is, forgive me for saying it in a Shia, boring because it's Kabbalah. But the beginning of the story and the end of the story is fascinating. And I'll tell you the story Bekitz and Nimitz. I'm not going to give you a long speech. I'll tell you the story Bekitz and Nimitz. The Bekitz and Nimitz of the story is that Rab Shimon had a chevra of 10 people, including himself. There were 10 tzaddikim who were part of Rab Shimon's Idra, Rab Shimon's Cheder, Rab Shimon's Yeshiva. And it says in Kabbalah's form, Rab Chav brings it down that they correspond to the 10 Sfiras. And it says their names. And Rab Shimon bar Yochai got them together, and he taught Kabbalah, and what's called Idra Rabbah, which is in the Zohar and Pashas Naseh. And as Rab Shimon bar Yochai was teaching this Kabbalah, 3 of them did another Vanavim. The neshamas floated away. They passed away from the Giluyim, from Lakus. Now, if you were that Cheder, nothing would happen to you. But they pushed the neshamas of L'mayla. Klas es Saba Shemeisu be'Idris, called the Chassidus. The 3 sages who died in the yeshiva of Rab Shimon bar Yochai. The Rebbe has sichas on it, my modem on it. How were they allowed to pass away? How is it different? Another Vanavim was considered a mistake that they died from saying Kabbalah. How did these 3 tzaddikim pass away saying Kabbalah? And the basic answer is they passed away when Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was teaching Kabbalah because it was actually the end of their life. And if it's the end of your life, then it's actually a good thing. The best way to die is not that the goof breaks down, but the neshama flutters out of the goof. So you're listening, you're keeping score, yeah? There was Rabbi Shimon had a group of 10. He was one of them, his son Abelazar was another one of them, and another 8. And they would get together and they would teach Torah. The first time they did it's called Idra Rabbah, the big Cheder. He taught Kabbalah, all the fancy Kabbalahs in Pashas Nasi and Pashas Azinu. And as he was teaching Kabbalah, 3 of them passed away. Years later, he called the remaining 7 Chevre, 6 plus him. He said, remember last time we did this and 3 of us went Neshama, let's get together again, and this time I'm going up. Now imagine being a Talmud of Reb Shimon. And Reb Shimon sends you a message, come together to the Idre, we're going to sit and we're going to learn. And from our learning, my neshama is going to be'ela b's'ora ha'shamayma. How do you feel about that prospect? Huh? Is anybody listening to me? Huh? Quite uncomfortable, right? It's weird, yeah? Here's the good news. No one's inviting you to such a fabrengen. Even big tzaddikim are not invited to such fabrengens. You're talking about the holiest Jews who ever lived. They were in such a high madrege that this was something which they were able to handle. And they came. And he said Taylor. And he passed away. The Zohar describes the story. He told them why he's inviting them. They shouldn't have showed up. I would say, don't come. What are you showing up for? Rashi says, when Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Jews, we're going to go fight a war with Midian, and after the war is over, I'm going to die. So the Jew says, we're not going to fight. I'm sorry. We're delaying the war. We're delaying your death. And Moshe Rabbeinu had to force them. But Rab Shimon's Talmidim knew that with Rab Shimon you don't play games. They were at a madrege. Could you imagine being in such a madrege? Where your Rebbe says, come, I'm going to say Teira, and as I'm saying Teira, my neshama is going to be Eila B'Sara Hashamayma. Something like that happened by the Mittel Rebbe usually. But he didn't tell him before. He didn't give him a heads up. Chavra, I'm going to say Chassidus, and in the middle of Maimah, my neshama is going to leave my guf. He just did it. Reb Shimon told him, let's get together, we'll say Teira, and then I'll be Eila B'Sara Hashamayma. And it's exactly what happened. But in that Zohar, which is about 20 daf, it's 10 daf, maybe 20 pages, he says, Bi b'simcha, Bi b'simcha, Bi b'simcha, Bi b'simcha. And we learn from this that Rabbi Shimon wanted that on his Hilula, on his Yartzat, the day of his Histalkos, there should be Simcha by Yidden. Once we discovered, and I don't know who, because the Zohar doesn't give a date. The Zohar tells the story, but doesn't give a date. That date is Lag BaOmer. This became the second reason for celebrating the Simcha of Lag BaOmer, has to do with the Hilula, the Rashbi, the Histalkos, the passing away of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay? So Lag BaOmer is a Yom Tov for 2 reasons. Al Pi Halacha, it's a Yom Tov because it's an end or an interruption of Avelas. An end of mourning, Rabbi Akiva Tamid stop dying, and that's kind of hard. If they all died, exactly what is there to celebrate? There's nobody left to die. Unless you say someone left over, but the Gemara doesn't say that. Kula Mesa Be'esa Peirik. They all died at that time. All. And the second reason is Hilul that Rabbi Shimon passed away. In Sfardic circles and in Hasidic circles, there's no question that the koch of Lag BaOmer is not on the fact that Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim stopped passing away, but the koch of Lag BaOmer is that it's the Yartzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. If we were Ashkenazim, if we were Litvaks, Nigli Yidden, I would imagine, I don't know, I'm not in a Litvish circle, that when they would celebrate Lag BaOmer, they also celebrate. Lag BaOmer is halachically a Yom Tov. It's not just a Chassidus, it's halacha, it's a Yom Tov. They would focus Nestame, I'm assuming, on the other idea. Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim stopped dying, that's the reason for a Yom Tov. But by people who are connected to Pnimis HaTeira, to Kabbalah, there's no question that the greater reason for celebrating Lag BaOmer is the fact that Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim stopped passing away. I'm sorry, Rabbi Shimon passed away. That's the young Lag BaOmer. When the Rebbe talked about Lag BaOmer, you could think it was the holiest day of the year. He talked about Lag BaOmer with such a koch, Lag BaOmer. He learned the Rashbi. The Rebbe talked about Lag BaOmer. It was such a big deal by the Rebbe. In Eretz Yisrael, tens of thousands, they had a tragedy a few years ago, remember that? But unbelievable, how could that happen? By Lag BaOmer, on his Hilula, 47 people passed away. It's a shrek l'chazach. Al Pi Teva, we know why it happened. Al Pi Teva should have happened 100 times before. The lack of safety over there was extraordinary. The miracles why it didn't happen until that year. But how could Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai allow by his kavod, on his yard site, which he said is a simcha, that 47 people should lose their lives. How could the B'Shem B'chai let it happen? I don't answer that question. It haunts me. But people gather by Rashbi and they celebrate, they sing, they dance, right? A lot of people make their first haircut. The Arizal brought his son to Rashbi to make his first haircut. They call it Chalaka by the Sfardim, whatever Chalaka means. The first Upsherin, right? The big deal of Minig Yisrael or Upsherin. It's also very connected to Pnimis HaTorah, to the Arizal, so one. Okay, but that's the Yom HaLagway. And of course, it cannot escape you how ironic it is that we have a Yom Tov for two reasons. Reason number one, so-and-so didn't die. Reason number two, so-and-so did. I don't understand. Is death a good thing or a bad thing? If death is a good thing, then Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim passed away, the whole sphere should be a Yom Tov. And if death is a bad thing, so why are we celebrating the death of Sheba Yechoy? It doesn't make any sense. Well, here's a Maimed that asks that question. You have the page in front of you. I have to read some words that shouldn't be total Dvarim. I don't understand. Like Ba'ayim is a Yom Tov that celebrates a cessation of death. This version of Ba'ayim goes back to the times of the Shainim. I think it even goes back to the times of the Go'ayim. In other words, it's not mentioned in the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't have a Yom Tov for the death of a cessation of the death of Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. But it doesn't begin with the Mekubalim. It goes back to the Rishonim and it's to the Teresh Shabbat Peh. In other words, they had an oral tradition going back to the times of the Shas. That like maybe they stopped to die or they interrupted to die. Put the Tanya on top of the Siddur. Yeah, it's supposed to be. The Siddur is Tanya, Tilim, Siddur. You have three books on top of the other. Yeah, like that. I'm a nudnik. Yeah, do that way, yeah. I'm a nut. Yeah. And then you have a Yom Tov and Rabbi Shimon passes away. You see the irony, yeah? What's going to be the answer? The answer is there's two kinds of tzaddikim. There are tzaddikim that their ikir inyan is nigla. And there are tzaddikim that their ikir inyan is nista. The tzaddikim, the ikir inyan is what you see with your eyes. And when someone passes away, it's a tragedy. That's such nigla. What does nigla mean? It's revealed. Now there happens to be something called nigla of Torah. Nigla of Torah speaks to the nigla of the reality. Someone passes away, it's a sad day. Right? In the olden days, people didn't use the word death. We've lost our sensitivity. In the olden days, you hear the Rebbe talking about it. The Rebbe doesn't use the word death. He uses the word felt. What the word felt means? In Yiddish, not in English. Felt means missing. The space is empty. Or the Rebbe wrote a letter to somebody that when you be Menachem Avol, you guys are all going to be Menachem Avol this week, unfortunately, and I would imagine you were at the Levaya, so you were already Menachem Avol. So you say, Hamokim Menachem Eschem B'Seich Sha'ar Aveli Tzivi Rishaloyim. So the Rebbe says, Hashem has many names. Why by Shiva you say the word Hamokim? Hamokim is the Eibishter's name. I'll tell you how. Mokim is 186. Mokim has two mems, that's 80. Kuf is 100, and Vav is 6, 186. If you multiply Yud K Vav K by itself, Yud is 10, right? 10 times 10 is 100. Hey is 5, 5 times 5 is 25. You got two of those, that's 150. Vav is 6, 6 times 6 is 36, is 186. Mokim is Havaya Benibua. If you multiply the Yud by itself, not 26 times 26. 10 times 10, 5 times 5, 6 times 6, 5 times 5, it's Havaya. So Mokim is one of the many names of the Eibishter. But why, when a person passes away, to use this name of all the names of the Eibishter, why do you use the name HaMokim? So the Rebbe says, because when somebody passes away, there's an empty space. So you say, HaMokim, he who is the essence of space. Who Mekayim Mishalayah, the Eibishter allows us to be by creating space. He is our space. He gives us permission to exist. And now, he's taken something away and left over an empty space. It's felt, there's somebody missing. HaMokim Yenachem, the Eibishter, who created space and filled the space and now has evacuated the space, should console, should refill the space, should somehow, they used to say, Hamokim Malach Esreincha, by whatever, I'm not going into the halacha aspect of it, whatever missing should be refilled. That's why by Hashiva you say Hamokim, that's what Rebbe said in the letter. Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim passed away, there's an empty space, there's a gash in the Jewish world. The whole yeshiva system died. Rabbi Akiva was Rosh Yeshiva Old Talmidim in Eretz Yisrael. It was after the Churban, after all the Tzaras. The Beis Mikdash was destroyed. Untold number of people were murdered. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yechim Zakei, who was his Rebbe's Rebbe, asked Aspasionis, asked Vaspian, to leave alone Yavda V'Chachamet, leave the yeshivas, and to leave Beis Rebbe. But Rabbi Akiva represented that. Rabbi Akiva was the Rebbe after Rabbi Yechon Mizaki, after Elazar ben Hurk and Yeshua ben Chananya, Elazar and Yeshua, they were his Rebbes. Rabbi Akiva, and they all died. All of them, boom, 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 gone. And Rabbi Akiva was such a courageous man, such a strong person, he started over. He should have been shattered with 5. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, I say 5 in French, Spanish, I don't even know. Cinco, yeah. He started from the beginning, mid-finif. And from these 5, you had the whole Teresh Baal Peh, like it says in Chazal. The Gemara says, Kulu alibad Rabbi Akiva. The whole Torah we have today, including Zohar. Because Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is one of those 5 leftover Talmidim. It's all Rabbi Akiva's. And Rabbi Akiva's father was a Ger Tzedek. Listen to me. Rabbi Akiva was no Meyuchas. His father's name was Yosef. Rabbi Akiva's father was a convert. And the whole Torah we have now, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Agoda, the Kabbalah, the Musar, the Chkirah, it's all Rabbi Akiva. From those 5 guys that Rabbi Akiva taught after his 24,000 Talmidim passed away. It's unbelievable. So when they stop dying, it's a Yom Tov. When they stop missing, as the expression fell, and in the same breath you say, this one of the 5 that actually survived eventually also passes away, and this is a Yom Tov. Why? Because if you're a tzaddik on the level of Nigla, what's the Nigla? What's revealed? That there's an empty space. It's a mourning. But if you're a tzaddik on the level of Nister, if your whole identity as a tzaddik is what's hidden is that the neshama has an aliyah. When the neshama leaves the guf, the neshama goes to Hamadrega. So since Reb Shimon's life, although he had a physical body, was defined by his nister, so when he passes away, it's a Yom Tov because on the level of nister, neshama went from a lower Hamadrega to Hamadrega. That's what this Maimon is going to talk about. For some tzaddikim, I would say for most tzaddikim, since Iker Limudam, all tzaddikim learn Nigla, all tzaddikim learn Nister, but what defines you? Most tzaddikim are defined by Nigla. What's the Nigla reality? Someone's missing. You can't hear a shiur, so it's an avelis. But some tzaddikim on the Madrega of Nister, those Talmidim who are on the Madrega of Nister, on the day that they pass away, there's an aliyah. So Reb Shimon said to his Talmidim, for me, you're going to sing and dance, you're not going to cry. And there's 2 parts to it. My neshama is having an aliyah, so you're going to be besimcha. And you're my talmidim, so you're going to experience my aliyah, so you should be besimcha. And that's Lag Boimer. Lag Boimer is the simcha for people who on the nigla level, death is a felon, being missing is a bad thing. There was a stopping to the missing. And on a Nister level, a tzaddik, which is connected to Nister, his neshama went up, his soul went up to heaven in a storm of Seder Satera, and it's a Yom Tov for 2 opposite reasons. I chose this Maimon primarily because it's short, but I don't know if I'm going to finish it. But we're going to start. Okay?